Let's say, for instance, one of the teams was lack of time, and another team was sleeping in. No, that's terrible. That's fucking awful. So this video is going to focus on the findings chapter, which is probably the easiest chapter if you know what you're doing. So your findings chapter is going to have a few different sections in it. So like the other chapters, you can really break this down into a nice, easily digestible structure. So your first section is going to be, now if you're looking at this from a qualitative point of view, your first section is going to be demographics. Now you can have demographics also for quantitative. Frequently it's more common in a quantitative type thesis, but you can also introduce some demographics as well at the beginning of this findings chapter. You can mention, especially if you're using pseudonyms, so you can say participant 1 works at this company or holds this role, and you can mention their age or you can mention location, but only if it's relevant. You know, don't mention if someone is 35 and it has nothing to do with the study, it's irrelevant information. Now, the next section after that is going to be a section called thematic analysis. This is Brown and Clark. You're going to break down your data using their six-step analysis, and you're basically going to say that I pulled 4, 5, or 6 teams, if you want, from the data. And those 6 teams are going to constitute the main headings in this chapter. So the important thing just to remember is monikers. So if you call everyone who has been involved in your interview process interviewees, use that term throughout the rest of the chapter and the rest of the thesis. So don't mix up, don't say in one section interviewee 1 and then the next section call them participant 1. Just make sure everyone is the same. So how many teams should you have? You're sort of graded on having less teams. So, and your creativity is very important here. Umbrella teams encompass a number of different types of teams. So if you've just listed every single topic that's come up in your thesis or in your data, that's not really what the examiner is looking for. I've seen PhDs where people have 6 or 7 teams, but I've also seen a master's thesis where people have 6 or 7 teams. Generally work towards something that you use umbrella teams. So umbrella teams are basically a team that encompasses several other smaller teams. Ultimately, your goal here is to relate whatever comes in the findings chapter to the literature review in chapter 2. So if you're finding that you've given a lot of different space on the page to sub-teams or teams that maybe could have been shoved under other teams, you're going to find it difficult then to relate it back to literature. So if you have no literature for one of those teams, you're going to have what looks like a very unbalanced chapter. So you're going to have one team will have a lot of literature you can relate it back to, and then another team is going to have maybe 1 or 2 or none in the worst case. So you got to say to yourself then at that point, can I move that team that has very little literature, and can I just subsume that team under the previous team and just make it a different type of team or rename it so that it does function as a sort of an umbrella team. Just be careful. There's no point having one team and then having 6 sub-teams, because ultimately you have to relate each of those sub-teams to something in the literature review in your discussion chapter. And if you have 6 sub-teams and only 2 of them or 3 of them you have literature to relate it back to, it just raises question for the examiner. Then it's like, well, why did they put this in here? You're kind of showing your limitations of the thesis then at that point, really. So don't sort of shoot yourself in the foot and don't give the examiner any reason to doubt your ability, because you are being graded on your ability to be creative and to say, well, I got 6 teams from the data I collected, and could I have got 7 or 8? Of course, but I recognize that well, first of all, that I have a word count limitation, but also that I picked the most important ones, and that, yes, I could have mentioned this particular topic that came up, but that topic didn't come up amongst the other 10 people I was interviewing. or it didn't come up in such a way that I felt was relevant to the conversation, or a conversation being research question. So to stop people disappearing from the video because I might be sounding like I'm a crazy person going off topic, I provided a nice little slide here of what a qualitative chapter looks like. Now again, don't crucify me, this is going to differ slightly between, whatever your thesis is or whatever your field is, but the vast majority of qualitative theses I correct are going to look like this. Theme 1, perceptions of work-life balance. Subtheme, struggles with time management. So under those headings, you're going to have, first of all, a nice balance between quotes and summary. Mention participant 1 saying something, and then at the end of that sentence tack on a quote from them. Or you can have a block quote and then a little tag on the end of it to say that this person also mentioned this. The goal is not to have too much what I call white space on the page, and that comes from having too many block quotes just peppered around the thing. So the worst thing you could do is put theme 1, and let's just say perceptions of work-life balance, and then the rest of that chapter is basically theme 2, theme 3, theme 4, and it's just info dumping quotes. So always mix it up, always have a summary of a quote. You can put in a block quote, and then you can put in afterwards a summary. So just break it up, make sure that it doesn't look too much like you're just dumping in quotes, or make it look like you're summarizing too much, because you do have to have some proof that the participants actually said this. Now look, I've made a cardinal sin there and said participants instead of interviewees, so just be careful. Yeah, just make sure that you back up everything with evidence. So don't, and this is a big one, do not attempt to reimagine or reinterpret or guess that what the person intended to say. This is a raw data chapter, so you want to just basically see he said, she said, they said, and that's it. I don't want any interpretation of what they said. I don't want any discussion of what it looks like in relation to the literature, and I certainly don't want to hear anything about a research question in this chapter. In the interest of providing even more detail about a qualitative chapter structure, I provided a very handy visual, exact replica of what this chapter should look like. So you can see here again, there's not too much white space from just having too many block quotes. So the white space I'm referring to there is the bits on the side. Now you can get rid of that by, as you've seen here, so you have each participant express the detrimental impact of unemployment on their psychological and emotional well-being. One individual articulated the profound sense of worthlessness he experienced, stating, block quote. Okay, so you can see here, he also discussed how the prolonged duration of his unemployment exacerbated his emotional struggles and made it challenging to envision a brighter future. A quote, in summary, blah, blah, blah. So we can see here another example, theme 2, identity. You can see the exact same structure again. You have a little summary of what's happening, then you have a block quote, another bit of a summary, block quote, another bit, block quote, and then the summary at the end. So the goal is basically to introduce yourself into the chapter. So don't just have too many block quotes. Break them up by just having little bits and pieces between them. And the little bits and pieces are going to be you, and you basically not giving your opinion on it and not rewriting it or reimagining or interpreting what they mean. You're basically just saying exactly what they said, but saying it in a different way. So also of note in this chapter is you do not mention anything about the literature review here. That's just that comes in the next video, which is going to be the discussion video. But for now, I will just leave you with that sort of nugget to say, under no circumstances start discussing how the findings are related to the literature. Another thing as well, do not mention anything about the research question in this section. This section is purely just raw data. Here's everything that I got from the questionnaire, here's everything I got from the interviews, and that's it. There's no interpretation of it, there's no discussion of it, and there's certainly no mention of how it answers your research question. Because if you mention the lit review in here, then you have nothing for your discussion chapter. And if you mention the research question here, you have nothing for your conclusion chapter. So once again, keep everything raw in this chapter. Yeah, so I mean, this video has hopefully shown you that it's not rocket science. You know, it's just basically, if you look at everyone's thesis over the years in relation to qualitative, quantitative, or mixed, they all broadly look the same and they all broadly follow the same structure. You're not being asked to reinvent the wheel. Anyone that has a findings chapter that arranges stuff, like you might arrange your findings according to the research question, that is an approach you can use, but it just causes so much trouble down the line. And I will bring that up further in the discussion chapter. But for now, I would say if you follow this particular structure, you can't really go wrong.